Welcome back to Atypical Talk. This is a podcast where we have conversations that illuminate the intersection of faith, culture, and the common spaces of our humanity. I'm Abby.
And I'm Joel. And today we have a special guest with us, a friend of mine and a friend of the podcast, a friend of Bridgeway's. Eric McCoy is here with us, made the trek all the way from Peru, Indiana. So thanks for coming. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Excited to be here. I like how hesitant you were to call me a friend.
I was like, a friend of, he's my friend first.
I'll claim him.
It wasn't quite that. But yeah. So Eric, this is I think your second time on the pod with us, a little over a year ago. So yeah, thanks for coming down. Man, I love Eric. We just go way back and done a lot of life together and served together. And we just always have these types of conversations when we get together. So I'm like, it'd be fun to get Eric back on and just talk about these things. And Eric and I, in so many ways, we feel like we're cut from the same cloth. And then there's some differences that are always interesting. And I always learn from you. And I think everybody will as well. So thanks for making space in your busy schedule. You just had this last weekend at your church, Story Church, one of Bridgeway's partner churches, a big event. Yeah. So tell us about the big event.
Yeah. So every year, this is our third year doing it. Right before Easter, we host what we call the Egg Drop. It's an idea we learned from a different church years back, but basically just a big community egg hunt. But rather than just scattering eggs on the field, we take the Easter bunny up 60 feet in the air and drop eggs out on the field. We normally try and keep the kids from not getting hit by them. It was a little dicey this year, especially because we had to do it early, like mid-March. Yeah. Somehow ended up with sunshine and like 60-something degrees, but also had 40-mile-per-hour winds. So it was exciting. But
I love this. So Eric mentioned that at a previous church, we did an event like this. And at that event, I'll never forget, I think it was the first or second year, we were going to have people jumping out of airplanes, like skydiving and then dropping them, over a field. But it was too windy, but it was really hot. And I remember we had told people of the church to put like really good chocolate in these eggs, and then we had volunteers spread them out on this turf like 2 hours before the event started. So by the time everybody was opening their eggs, it was all melted chocolate.
It was
just goo and eggs. We're like, we're going to like recollect those eggs and take them. Just take the eggs with you. We're sorry. It's like, what a great lesson learned.
That's awesome.
There's that. I think it was Reese's. At one point, it was Reese's. I love it.
Yeah. So we're going to jump in with our first question. If you could only watch one movie for the rest of your life or only listen to one song for the rest of your life, which would you choose?
Thanks for asking this question and making it like my personal hell. It's like I knew core fear of mine is that I could only have one movie like in song. Like that's terrible.
I was trying to decide if I acknowledge how much I hate questions like this. So I'm just like, I can't pick. I don't want to have to.
Well, so if it was a song, which is just a nightmare to consider, it would have to be like a 30-minute live version of a Dave Matthews Band song that there's lots of different musical movements in it because I would get bored. But I would still probably hate that song after about a week, even if I love it. But for movie, I would have to go with something like the Two Towers, Lord of the Rings.
No way. That's what I was going to say.
No, it's not. You can't say he came on. He's like, I'm going to say whatever.
No, I have no song choice because I wouldn't even go there. But yeah.
But Two Towers is the one because I feel like it's really long and there's so many different movements. It's got one of the best battle scenes.
Helm's Deep.
It's so good. Yeah. There's humor all over it. But it would have to be something that I could watch in like 30 to 40 minute increments over time because I need to make it last. But I would go there. I think any other like just straight comedy or feel good movie I would end up hating. Yeah. Because it doesn't make me feel all the things the way that Tolkien makes me feel things.
Is Two Towers where you get the great Sam and Frodo speech too? It's like all the great stories, Mr. Frodo. Is that Two Towers? I feel like it's tail ended.
I think it is.
It's at the end of one or two.
Whichever one that is. I would just watch that scene on repeat and weep.
Yeah. I love that. So you didn't have a song?
I didn't. I didn't even go there.
I don't blame you.
So you hate music. What about you, Abby? What were you going to do?
I couldn't choose a movie. I love movies too much. But like for me, a song right now, it would have to be Someone New by Hozier. But he has a new EP coming out Friday, so that might change. Okay. So I don't know. But
he
right
might
now,
outdo himself.
Right now, when it's so nice and sunny, I drive around with my windows down and blast that song.
You know, that album, I looked it up, the Hozier album. Hozier, however we're saying it in Indiana. There's like 4 different interpretations. It's like saying Hebrew or Greek. We just make it up as we go. But that album from 2013 that first record of his, and I still go back to it. It's
So
like
good.
almost every track is just
it's so
incredible.
good. Yeah.
So I also saw online this last week that people are going around making memes of Hosier because he's 6'6", and they're like, we need to get him playing in the NBA. like, get this guy in the lane. No one's going to score on him. He's 6'6".
I know.
That's
I
so
see
tall.
him next to other people, and it's
So tall.
crazy how tall he is.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
it's amazing. But yeah, I love it.
Our first topic today is a Christianity Today article titled "My Disabled Son is the Image of God." Greg Harris talks about his son who is born with 1p36 deletion syndrome, a disorder that typically causes intellectual disabilities. He says, one of the first questions my son prompted me to ask was about the Imago Dei and what it means that humans are made in the image of God. Did my son have less of God's image than the rest of us because of his genetic deletion, chromosomal abnormalities, developmental delays, and other exceptionalities? He continues, in a Torah Tuesday episode from Carmen Amez on Exodus chapter 4, verses 10 through 12, I was reminded that God does not shrink away from the disabilities experienced by his people. In fact, as surprising as it sounds, God takes the credit for disabilities such as deafness, muteness, and blindness. In her punchy and profound book, My Body is Not a Prayer Request, Amy Kenny discusses the ableism she faces in the church as a woman with disabilities. She laments that local churches are among the most difficult spaces to inhabit for people with disabilities. The world tells us to love our tribe and put ourselves first, but the gospel beckons us to love God and treat even the most distant stranger as our neighbor. So what did you think about the way that the author looks at being made in the image of God?
I mean, it's a powerful article, especially, I mean, talking about your own child. And yeah, it's not just theory at that point. And I thought it was really beautiful and really expansive. Obviously, as a pastor, I talk about and hold on to that value at a really high level, but the practical implications of how he was applying it just even took it farther than I think I naturally go to.
Yeah, and I think for me, I was really moved by the article, just considering, being a parent and having that unknown of what it looks like, and then just sort of maybe your death of expectations of what being a father or having a child actually can look like. But for me, another thing bubbled up to the surface just in considering like this Imago Dei, image of God, which is such a core theology that I hold, is everyone's made in the image of God. And then some of the great questions he was asking of like his own belief in that, like, okay, so is my son made in the image of God? Is he fearfully and wonderfully made, although he's missing a chromosome, and all those different kind of things? And it really, it really surfaced in me this understanding of like, oh man, I think of image of God as a very binary, good, strong thing in like the way our culture measures it, and really challenged me to think like, oh, God paints with a brush with many colors, and he loves diversity, and he's more creative than I could ever imagine. And the strong picture of image of God that I get is one part of it. It's no better than the way he makes everybody different. It's been interesting as at our church at Bridgeway, we're in this process of building a new facility, and one of our visions from the very beginning was to have a room in our kids ministry wing for our children and families that have neurodiverse kids, like a sensory room for kids that might be on the spectrum, or just a typical kids environment, church environment where it's loud and colors and lights flashing is just not for them. And it's really been fascinating for me because the picture that I had of what that ministry would look like as we were like first talking about it is radically different than what I consider it to be now. And really talking to parents in our church and in our community that have kids that are really showing me like these kids are brilliant. They have a different neuro reality, but it's beautiful, and they're so smart, and some kids are so sweet and so kind in the way that other kids are not. And it's really challenged me in how I think about God's image and how God loves to have diversity in all these ways in the way he makes us, and all of them point back to who he is and emphasize characteristics of who God is in different ways. And I've just been really challenged by this, and then I found myself really moved by the article, thinking about it from a father's perspective and then a pastor who's a father's perspective. I'm just blown away by it.
It's funny to what you were just saying about the image of God and how we associate that so often with like our American value youth and strength culture. It's like whenever you think about heaven or like your redeemed body in the future, aren't we all like somewhere between 18 and 25 or something? Like,
the best shape of my life, right? All those different, that's what we think about.
but that's not in the Bible. That's not, and that's not promised to us necessarily. Yeah. So I think there's some really challenging but also clarifying implications to what was written in the article, just as far as like, what do we consider brokenness or an effect of sin versus what do we name beautiful and what do we embrace?
Yeah, and I think, what was it, that initial terrible doctor's appointment when they were told the diagnosis of their son, where it was just this kind of glib statement, but it's something that they actually held on to, that I think is something that's good for us all to hold on to, is just love him just as he is.
Yeah.
And I just, like, in the moment, like, think about how hurtful that would be to hear, like, dude, give me more than that. Like, really, that's it? But really, that is it. Like, that's it. That's what we're called to do with our own children and the people that we come in contact with, is to love them just as they are. And if we can't do that, that's on us. That's not on God screwing up anything on the other side of the equation. That's something that's a deficit in our hearts. I'm just really, moved by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Joel, you talked a little bit about our Boundless Kids ministry that's going to be in the next building, but what are some other ways that our church and Story Church, what are some ways that we are ensuring that our churches are a place where people with disabilities feel welcome and feel like they belong?
When I first thought that, I thought, oh no.
Yeah.
Right? We probably need to do better.
Yeah, it's a blind spot
and we need to think
have,
about it.
Sure.
It's just, but the more I thought about it, I'm like, there are people in Story Church who do have different disabilities. And I think one thing we can do is not feel so much pressure maybe to have a one-size-fits-all approach, but just to treat people as people. Like, for example, there's a woman who attends who is prone to suffering from seizures. And so she's had conversations with us before just about our lighting.
Lights.
Or even the backgrounds we put on our lyrics, like, hey, if you can avoid having too much movement, that's helpful. So it's now on our mind and it's on our radar.
But dang it, Eric, the movement brings energy and excitement into the room, is what we're thinking as pastors developing these services.
And,
but yes.
And at our worst, right, that's when we're like, no, that's how we do it. Just adjust. Yes. That's terrible. Yeah. But it's a simple change for us to make that helps her feel seen and welcomed and avoids that distraction. Or even, I think there's things from the platform that we can do just to, again, not be so in love with our neat and tidy 60-minute experiences. I was thinking about just moments where services have been disrupted by awkward human things, sometimes caused by people who have disabilities. And it's just making room for it and acknowledging it. I think that goes a long way. There's another guy who attends who needs a walker to get around. And so at the end of service, like, we meet in a movie theater, so there's only 2 rows out. It's like there's a backlog on that side, but everybody just sees that and embraces it, and it's not
that's beautiful.
a barrier. So
people aren't going,
yeah, exactly. Or if they are, they know, like, hey, I'm on that guy's team, not yours, so you can be late to lunch.
Yeah, I think about one of the things that we fell into that I think has been really beautiful, and this was not from a response that was probably healthy or kind, but we over we have music that's really loud in our services, and gotten just a couple comments about, why don't you turn the music down, it's hurting my ears, kind of thing. So at this little table we have by our front doors now, we have a little basket of earplugs, and we say, hey, we like our music loud here. If it's too much, we want you to have this, and so you're more comfortable during our services. And Abby, it blows our mind every single week. Like,
how many people take
there's
it?
At least 3 to 4 people that I personally see take them. And knowing there's a couple people that have autism that are in our church, that like that kind of thing can bother them, but they feel seen and they take it and they come. It's just been a really cool thing to see that in our new space as well. Like, we have this room that's going to be in the back of our worship center area that we're calling the comfort room as well, where there's going to be there'll be a TV with a live feed in there, but it's not, you're not going to see the flashing lights the same way. It's not going to be full direct speakers on you. That I think as well, we want to point people there if it's just a little too much, and we want to help people see that. But I think I'm challenged by the article, because in designing our spaces and designing our services, this is an afterthought, not a leading thought. And as Harris in the article points out, like, man, we're called to love and serve people as our neighbor right in front of us and to consider them. Man, the church has a long way to go. I have a long way to go as a leader to like be thinking on the forefront of those thoughts instead of being reactionary to those thoughts.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Our next article today is a CNN article titled "Addicted to TikTok? Here's what the House vote to effectively ban it could mean for you."
Government is awesome.
I mean, they could be doing better things with their time, but we'll get into it. The article says U.S. lawmakers have renewed efforts to crack down on TikTok over national security concerns related to its Chinese parent company, ByteDance. The bill would prohibit TikTok from U.S. app stores unless the social media platform is quickly spun off from ByteDance. The bill, called the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act, advanced out of the House Energy and Commerce Committee last week, and on Wednesday it was passed in the House with 352 affirmative votes and just 65 representatives dissenting. TikTok will not be disappearing from Americans' phones anytime soon. The bill faces numerous hurdles to being signed into law and will almost certainly face legal challenges if it is. And if the bill becomes law, the question remains whether an American buyer would step in to save the day if ByteDance is willing to divest the popular platform. So what do you think about this possible ban? We'll start with Eric, because I know Joel's opinion here.
People know. Are you on the Tickety Tack Talk?
So I have an account, but not really. It's fascinating for me because I'm like elder millennial. So it's like, this is the tipping point of social media for me where I'm like, yeah, kind of dabble. I get my TikToks through Reels.
There it is.
Right?
So that's, everybody makes fun of me because I'll like share a Facebook or Instagram Reel with people and they're like, dude, that was on TikTok 3 months ago. I'm like, that's who I am now.
That's what we do. At this status, it's secondhand. Yeah. Man, I mean, I think it's fascinating. If for no other reason, it's like massively bipartisan supported, which
it's
that
one of the first things. Yes,
right?
That's a crazy reality. Yeah.
And there's so many layers to it. So honestly, I mean, there's a certain element where I'm like, I don't know what I think. And I think for me, it's there's that blurry line, right? Because there's free speech and there's just the power. Even like, remember, since we're talking about being old, when social media started and like the power of, we're democratizing everything and now everybody can be a content creator. And that's a beautiful thing on the one hand. On the other hand, it's a dangerous thing.
Everyone can be a content creator.
Yeah, even like everyone has people a platform with ill intent. So, I mean, ultimately, I'm probably, especially as it relates to the next generation and to kids, I trend towards being a Luddite with it all, where I'm like, you know what, I'm okay if we want to introduce age restrictions on social media, just looking at what's happened. So for TikTok specifically, I know the concern is really like, what is a foreign agent doing to shape the perspectives and the minds of particularly young people? Mm-hmm. And so in that arena, I'm like, man, we can't be too careful.
Yeah, and the Chinese restrict TikTok for their citizens, their kids, a ton, and we don't do it at all yet. So it's an interesting thing. Yeah.
I was trying to think through, because one of the pushback that I've seen, some of the pushback I've seen, is in people who have built businesses based on TikTok, right? Now you're taking away my stream of income. Ironically, through a Reel that was probably originally a TikTok. I saw this ridiculous video of a guy who was trying to purchase a cruise missile from China. Oh my gosh. It was like 3 or 4 videos. I don't think he ever got it, obviously.
Yeah, we should figure out how that ended.
But I'm like, right, we all know, hey, there's some legitimate government restriction around doing things like purchasing cruise missiles from foreign agents. In the age we live in, information can be just as weaponized, and just as dangerous. And so I get where it's coming from. I also think it's going to be an uphill battle. And it just illustrates to me how much the pace of change and the pace of technology has outpaced our understanding of how it's impacting us and how we can really responsibly and morally navigate those things.
Yes, it really has. One of the interesting parts of this, like, it's really not a ban. Like, the language is interesting. It's extortion. I mean, it's basically them saying like, hey, you need to sell this out of being controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, or we're going to ban it on. Right. So you're going to lose your biggest client base, your biggest. So it's a business move, basically, and because the Chinese Communist Party is behind the ownership of it, who's an adversary of America, and America is the biggest client. customer. They're playing this kind of game in this way. So the reality is it's too popular. It's not going to be banned. So I'm sad about that. It's still going to be around somewhere in some form. But it is interesting that, like you mentioned, this is the thing that no one's talking about. This might be the first bipartisan action that we've seen from our federal government in a really long time. Like, we can't agree on anything. But we had literally only 65 representatives didn't vote to say, hey, this is not good. The way it currently is set up is not good for us as a country and for our youth. So we need to make some changes.
You're just talking about that. You also have to acknowledge the incomplete measure that it is, because if you sell it to an American company, which will likely happen, TikTok continues. Yep. There's domestic agents who aren't doing great things with information too.
Wait, you're saying some Americans don't have good intent for our youth?
I don't know that we're really solving that problem. And to me, that is the problem.
Yeah.
But I mean, from a national security standpoint, I get where it's coming from.
Yeah. Abby, you are the TikTok queen. So I know you think that, and everybody agrees that our government should be doing much more and more important things than getting involved with a social media platform. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, what's your take on this?
I mean, I think it's silly. I mean, we have the same issues. I mean, if it's a thing where, kids shouldn't be on the app, it should be the same with Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that. I think that laws could be put in place to protect children more. I mean, right now on my TikTok feed, there's a lot of conversations about this one specific woman who's been basically exploiting her child and making money off of her child. And people are sure that there's going to be a law made in her child's name because of her, using her child to make money. And a lot of the content she posts of her child is very inappropriate and attracts pedophiles. And so I think that laws need to be put in place to protect children and not necessarily just getting this app banned or selling it to an American company right now.
That's exactly what the Communist Party wants, Abby. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, but I mean,
we'll see. We got to follow up on this because of what happens. Because I really do think that the whole ban idea was because they're trying to get it out of the Chinese Communist Party's hands to make it to where some rich billionaire in America who has bad intentions can deal with it from there.
We're cool with that.
Let's kick the can down the road.
Yeah, it's not going to change a whole lot anytime soon. But if you guys could make one meaningless law.
Look at the segue. Meaningless law to meaningless law. Oh, man.
What would it be?
And this is so one meaningless law. Uh-huh. Okay, so for me, it would be whenever I eat at a restaurant that's like a sit-down restaurant, if I go to the restroom, my meal has to be put on the table as I return to the table.
That's so oddly specific.
It is one of the greatest experiences you ever have, right? If you're you're waiting for your meal and all of a sudden you come, I know this is so specific,
so you're
but
I want to say
that I want to say that it's meaningless. It's fun, but that's a great feeling. Do you guys know that feeling I'm talking about? Am I the only one? I feel like I'm in a Seinfeld bit right now.
I like to be at the table when my food comes. I can thank the waiter.
I sit down and they put the plate right there. I'm very Larry David Seinfeld in this. This is one of the greatest things.
I'm not feeling that
way. Somebody's got to comment on this that they feel that.
I come back and I'm like, oh, it's here.
I want it sitting right there as I sit down. Mm-hmm. That's my meaningless law. But thinking about restaurants.
But it's going to be a law. So if you go to the restroom and they don't bring out your food,
they're in trouble.
They're fined or arrested.
I didn't think through the ramifications. Okay. I'm leading on the meaningless side of this meaningless law.
You added oddly specific.
That is very oddly specific. I want to also clarify that is the first thing that came to my mind. I don't know what that says about me at all.
All I had, and I'm getting more generous on this one, but I would just outlaw Crocs.
Oh,
I know it's not popular.
Hot take.
Not popular.
Dude, I'm afraid for your church now because you have offended a lot of people.
I know. Our drummer was wearing Crocs, and he's welcome. Crocs? He's welcome,
but he can't bring the Crocs.
But shoes and sweat holes, just why?
I've never worn Crocs. I don't know the appeal. Yeah.
Well, the rumor that I heard, and maybe we can fact check this, but I heard that if you were ever in a desperate situation and you needed to eat something, that you could boil your Crocs and eat them.
I have actually heard that too.
I've never heard that.
No, I love that. If that's not true, that we both heard this.
It must be an Instagram Reels thing because I have no idea what this is.
Abby, you tell us yours, but I'm researching eating Crocs right now. Is what I'm. This is the real research we do here on the pod.
I feel like mine isn't as meaningless. I just want stores to have the price like included with tax. I want that to be listed.
Tax
because let me tell you, last week Allison and we volunteered at the book fair at Elwood Haynes. The amount of kids I had to explain what tax was to them, it was so difficult. Yep. These kids did not understand. They're like, I have $5. Why can't I buy this thing that's $4.99? And it was
the government.
Yeah.
You're in a public school, kid. It's paying for
this. You're just Ron Swansoning them the whole time.
But I mean, I would benefit from that too. I mean, I hate going to a store and being like, okay, this item's $30. Time to pull out my phone and figure out what the tax is going to be.
Yeah. So it's like at restaurants where they put the calories up. This is much more fun.
Yeah.
Than like when they put the calories of meals up. You're like, oh, I don't like that anymore. But here you see the price with tax. I can do that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So a lot of other countries already do that. Oh. Yeah. So I think we're just behind.
It's just reasonable. That's not meaningless. That's actually reasonable.
That's a good idea.
I win the meaningless one. Anyway, so here's the hard-hitting research about boiling Crocs. Can you boil and eat Crocs? If you must know, this is the first thing on Google. I literally Googled, can you boil and eat Croc shoes? And here's the answer. If you must know, yes, people have actually tried this. In fact, a kid back in 2016 boiled pieces of his Crocs and ate them, then wrote about it for a school paper. No one has died from eating Crocs, so the non-toxic statement really could be true. But still, it's a bad idea to eat them, is what the top of Google says.
I like how the standard is, no one's died.
Yeah. Oh, I feel like that doesn't really make it.
How's that kid doing now?
Yeah, like, what's he doing now? That's what I want to know. Let's see the long-term effects of this. Long Croc eating is the real danger.
Croc eating.
I feel like there's something different between it being edible and non-toxic. And like...
Yeah, the thing that I feel like I had heard was like, it was intentional or like...
That you could eat them.
You could if you needed to. Not like...
in a tough spot.
You can also eat the paint off the walls if you want.
Inflation. Probably. Eat your Crocs.
Inflation. Eat your Crocs.
Our last article today is a Christianity Today article titled, "The 2016 Election Sent Me Searching for Answers." Carrie Sheffield shares in this article about her Mormon upbringing and difficult childhood. She swore that she would never return to religion after everything she went through and because of the evil things she'd seen done in God's name. As an adult, she worked as an analyst for major Wall Street firms. She talks about how the 2016 election started her search for spiritual answers. She says, "During this crisis of meaning, I felt distraught and adrift, so I turned to church. The more I studied science, history, anthropology, and other disciplines, the more my faith in God and my confidence in Christianity grew. In Mormonism, further study had produced further disillusionment. Studying Christianity felt like uncovering buried treasure discarded by intellectuals who had discounted its scientific and philosophical heft. More than 6 years since my baptism, I enjoy a healthier relationship to politics. I still have strong convictions, which I don't hesitate to share in columns, speeches, or TV appearances, but I know God is far bigger than any puny man-made system." So being in another election year, we may come across people like Carrie who feel lost and distraught in our current political climate. What would you say to those people?
I thought, getting that in a second, I thought this article was fascinating just because it was the 2016 election that led her to faith. And I feel like the story that I've heard so much more often is like, that's when I started questioning everything.
I left church. I left faith.
I got disillusioned. Yes. So it was fascinating. But it also highlights... in some ways, the opportunity for the church and for leaders in these pivotal years. I mean, I think there are a lot of people trying to figure out, especially it's confirmed now, right, that we have the same candidates that we did 4 years ago. I feel like there's a lot of people just kind of asking, like, what are we doing? Regardless of which side of the aisle or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So I think that it requires a lot of nuance. And honestly, I think one of the best things that we can do and one of the best things that I would tell people is like slow down the conversation, because especially in an election year, right? The posture is outrage and get mobilized.
This is the most important election, most
every
important
year,
decision,
right?
Yeah, that you'll ever have in our lifetime. This is the end of our republic, or this is this. Yeah.
And it certainly matters. But I think taking a more prayerful, more nuanced, and more community-focused approach can help keep you grounded through it.
Yeah, I love one of the things that she said in the article. I highlighted it. was studying Christianity felt like uncovering buried treasure discarded by intellectuals who had discounted its scientific and philosophical heft. I love that she went on this. It was like that she was under fire because of all that was happening in 2016 and some scandals in her church and all those different kind of things. And it was almost a purifying fire to where she like actually had to look deeper and what this whole thing was about. And these people, what is this all about? And I just thought, man, that should be the story that we're telling people. And that's the story that Christianity actually shows, is not just a simple believe it, pray a prayer, you get to go to heaven when you die, you're on the good side and everybody else is the bad guys here. But it's like, it's big, it's heavy, it answers the biggest, deepest questions and longings that humans have ever had. And I just love that so much, that she discovered that it was so much bigger than just this old story that she'd heard people believe.
I think it's really important. And I think, Joel, you've said this, and I think you guys have talked about it here at Bridgeway before, that Jesus is political, but he's not partisan.
Yes, I was going to go there. Yes. And one of my favorite little pet topics to talk about. Go for it.
Yeah, so I think that informs this too. Like you were talking about the like just version of salvation that says, I pray the prayer, I go to heaven, and I'm just waiting it out until then. That's really not the heart of Jesus at all. Jesus had so much to say about heaven coming here. What do you guys say? The up there coming down here, right?
Yeah, you
bringing it down here.
It's really scary because sometimes people say, like, the down there coming up here. I'm like, oh no,
not that one. Yeah, that was so the correct way of saying it was so close to Jesus's heart that there's a danger if we just say like, nope, I'm just not doing politics because I'm a Christian. Like, that's not really on the table if you're following Jesus actively.
Because politics in its core is about power. It's about how we structure power and who gets power and who doesn't. And so
how we organize ourselves.
How we organize ourselves as a society. That matters because people matter. Right?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's danger in disengaging. There's also danger in equating political power to spiritual power, right? Like, that's where this whole conversation of Christian nationalism has been so heated and so prevalent, as a large portion, or a portion, I don't know how large, of our country is trending that way, where it's like, no, we have to double down and leverage these systems to in some way make Jesus more powerful or influential. And that's not actually what Jesus did when he had the chance to, right? Standing in front of Pontius Pilate, he's like, you've only got power because somebody allowed you to have it.
And my kingdom's not of this world. I'm doing a different thing, a different reality.
I actually heard recently on a podcast I was listening to this framework that it's just stuck with me. I think it's really helpful. He said that we have to resist making Caesar Christ, right? So political leaders, political power, we have to not make them equal to Jesus. And we also need to not make Jesus Caesar. That Jesus didn't either, that the posture of the church and of faithful Christians, it's really somewhere in the middle where, God wants society to be ordered. It's a way that he enacts justice. It's a way that we care for one another. So it's not like, just opt out of government altogether, or anarchy is better or something. That's not reflected in God's heart. At the same time, the role that the church can play, rather than leveraging power, is often followers of Jesus have spoken truth to power and have held up a mirror to power to say like, hey, this is actually what you're doing to actual people. And I think there's plenty of arenas, I mean, we've talked about some today even, where faithful Christians could and should leverage that kind of political influence rather than just joining whichever party gets us the most outraged and looking like everybody else.
A couple principles that I like to give people when they ask me, how do we even walk through the season that we're getting into now that we know the two candidates and know sort of what's going down. A couple principles, if you're a follower of Jesus, I would encourage people to think is like, whoever is elected president, Jesus is still king. Like, let's not put all of our eggs in the basket of whoever gets the most electoral college votes at the end of the day. Like, it's not like Jesus is going to be like, oh no, this really messed up my plan. So it's not like we should have our hair on fire one way or another. But also, I think there is a danger in completely disengaging because laws and policies, they affect our neighbors. They affect people that God loves. And so how do we faithfully engage in ways that we feel led to do so and bring our law of Christ shaped conscience into this arena. And for me, what's helpful to think about is that my vote cannot just be about my life. My vote has to be about my neighbors. If I'm called to be a servant, and greatness in the kingdom of God is to serve all people, I've got to think about how the policies that are represented by one candidate or the other, how it affects my neighbor. And I have to consider how these policies affect the least of these. I can't put those two things aside and follow Jesus at the same time. I can't just be thinking about my taxes. I can't just be thinking about my property value. You know what I mean? Like I can't, and those things are going to be there, but it's got to be about others as well as we follow Jesus. And so my little thing as I try to think through, because I think that all political parties, these kingdoms of this world, like they try to co-opt faith people, and they're trying to game us. They all have their Bible verses that they can use, right? But I'm just, as I'm thinking about voting, I'm like, which candidate's policies is going to do the least amount of harm to the most amount of people? Is that cynical to think? But like, you know, knowing that like it's not, there's going to be things that are broken through both things, but which candidate's policies are going to do the least amount of harm to the most people? And I think for me, that's how I'm trying to think about things. And just so nobody tries to pin me down, I think that you can be a faithful Christian and come to different conclusions to that answer. But I want us to be asking that question.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful thing. That's not me-centered. It's others-centered, which sounds a lot like Jesus, for us to be considering what this means for others, not just me. And I'm challenged by that.
If I could even tag one piece of advice I would give on that too, we get so dialed in, and of course all the dollars are spent, and these campaigns are huge for national presidential elections. Yeah. But so many of us have no idea who's on our city councils, no connection to local nonprofits that are making a difference, or, you know, so I would just say, yeah, the presidential election matters and national politics matter, but local politics and local governance is actually impacting your immediate neighbors.
Yeah, so good, man.
So much more, and so much more quickly. And you have so much more opportunity to influence in those ways. If I can wear my little nerdy American history hat for a second.
Do it. I wish he really had a hat for the video version of this. It's like an Uncle Sam hat is what I'm really picturing.
That's incredible. Yeah. To what you were saying, just about doing it in the context of community, it was like right after the forming of the nation, this Frenchman, Alexis de Tocqueville, came over, and he was observing America as it was forming. And one of the most common things he's quoted as observing about the early American culture is we had all of these associations with one another, whether they were religious groups or civic groups. They were small communities where people who were different than one another interacted. Wow. And he called that our strength. And if you really look at what has been happening, again, I sound like a Mr. Anti-social media today, but particularly since digital platforms have become more prevalent and more available to us, we're just splintering off from one another. Those communities are harder and harder to find. And I think it could be a really beautiful call on the people of God in this cultural moment to be the ones who create those communities again, who actually get involved. So, I mean, the way that God's kingdom comes to earth, I think, is often through just ordinary people getting involved in things that matter to them or matter to their neighbors because they're living in such close relationship with them. So I would say, like, if you're tempted to be the person who's like, politics are crazy and I'm just not doing it, that's fine on one level, but then get out and get to know your neighbors and get to know their problems and their struggles, and then see if that motivates you to do something, because you'll end up being political in the healthy way if you do that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today,
so great,
Eric.
man. Yeah, great conversation.
Thanks for having me anytime.
Well, that's it for this episode of Atypical Talk. If you have any topics, questions, anything like that, you can send those to atypicaltalkpod@gmail.com. Make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Atypical Talk Pod. And make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to get updates when new episodes go live. We hope that these conversations today have helped you think wider, love deeper, and partner with God to bring the up there down here in your everyday life. Thanks for listening.
Follow us on TikTok as long as you can.